Evolution of Populations, Part 1. All right. So, we know that populations evolve, not individuals. So, it's the whole populations. This is because we are what we are because of the genetics we're inherited. So, we keep talking about survive to reproduce. You can't change your somatic cells, your body cells, DNA by choice, only through this random mutation. But if a mutation occurs in the DNA that's located in the gametes, the sperm and the egg cells, then those changes can affect the next generation of offspring, and therefore a change in the traits has occurred. In other words, the population is evolving from generation to generation. Evolve just means change over time, and that's what has occurred. There's some sort of change that's occurred over time. So the individuals suffer or benefit as a result of the traits they inherited or mutations they acquired during their life. So it's this weak versus strong concept. Weak versus strong genes is the way it's usually communicated. Weak are considered detrimental traits, ones that are not going to be an advantage, and strong are considered favorable traits in terms of course, the survive to reproduce. So with population genetics, whoops, let's go back here. So with population genetics, this is a study that this is a science that studies the trait variation rates over time within a population. So they look at what's happening over time with a population, and it's basically following the allele frequency rates in a gene pool. So it's following it within a population, not individuals, it's within that gene pool. And as we said before, the population is defined by those 4 criteria: same species, same place, same time, reproducing. All right, now the species, of course, I don't know why he would use this example. The male and the female blue-footed boobies. Oh my goodness. But species, mostly defined as organisms that are so genetically similar in their genome that exist that the potential to breed and produce viable or living, fertile, able to reproduce eventually themselves offspring. So they're going to breed and produce living offspring that are able to reproduce, because some of them will breed, but they don't produce offspring that are able to breed, and so they're born sterile. And again, this is to keep in mind we're surviving to reproduce. The genetics are very similar genetics are very similar, is important to defining a species, since it is the blueprint for constructing an organism. So that genetics is very important. That, of course, that's our DNA. It's the blueprint of who we are. The plans have to be very similar, or there's going to be confusion in the construction, and problems are going to arise during development. This is why a cat can't breed with a dog, because they don't have enough similarities. That blueprint has to be almost the same in order for them to breed and produce living offspring that are able to reproduce. The problems are a terrible thing to encounter, since we're discussing the making of a living organism. And so you don't just throw things together and see what ends up happening, because you're making something that's alive. All right. So when we look at the geographic range versus a population, so here we have the geographic range of West Coast salamanders. And you can see the variation that exists. They're all still salamanders, but look at the difference in colors that exist in the different geographic regions, in the different physical locations. So a population is in one specific given area. That's why it's the same species at the same place at the same time that's reproducing. Because this population of salamanders is different than this population of salamanders, because they're not in the same place. So a population is in one specific given area, but in the case of organisms that are quite common, like gray squirrels or humans, we can have several populations that cover a wider expanse of territory. So in the case of humans as a species, we're global in our range, but we have millions of different populations, such as the population of Montgomery or the population of Birmingham. And so range refers to everywhere that species may be found. So when we're looking at the range, this species of salamander could be found anywhere here through California. So gene pools may or may not interact. It depends on the species and if there's any geographic barriers, such as mountains, bodies of water. This is why when we talked about the island speciation, obviously water's dividing them, and so there's no interaction there. It's going to keep them divided. They're not able to interact. Excuse me, yawning. So the allele frequency, now remember, an allele is a version of a gene. So we had big B, little b. The big B is an allele and the little b is an allele. And so they're different versions of that gene. And so an allele is a version of it, such as brown or blue for eye color. Now, when we talk about allele frequency, when we're talking about frequency, it's referring to how many, how frequent is it? So frequency is referring to how many are present at that time within that population. So that's where we're getting the, within that gene pool, the population, the gene pool. If this allele frequency is considered fixed, then there's no change in the frequency. There's not going to be any changes. And there's going to be no evolution that change over time. There's going to be no evolution that's present. So we call this a state of equilibrium is occurring because there's nothing that's going on. If it is evolving, if there is change, if the frequency is changing, then evolution is occurring. And this is a state of change occurring over time. So it can be fixed, where we look at it, it's at equilibrium, or it can be, or it can be changing. All right, and we're going to pick up with the Hardy-Weinberg theorem next time, which is actually the math behind the changes in this allele frequency. Oh, whew, love that stuff. Love the math. I know you will too when we're done. Hopefully. Have a great weekend.